We continue now with another guest in our series, The Energy Equation, with a look at the nation's largest independent power producer, NRG Energy. Although NRG is involved in many forms of power generation, that includes solar and wind, the company made news just this week when it announced that new reactors at its South Texas nuclear plant could be delayed or canceled in light of the failures at those Japanese plants. Joining us right now to talk about all of this is the NRG CEO. He is David Crane. David, great for you to be here.
Oh, thank you.
What do you think is going to happen with those plants, the South Texas nuclear plants? Do you think it's going to be a cancellation? Do you think it's going to be a delay? And when will you know?
Well, I think the first thing, obviously, is we have to wait till the situation in Japan is completely contained and then see what the regulatory reaction is going to be in the U.S. I mean, certainly, I think there's going to be some delay. But whether it's a fatal delay or one that we can cope with, it remains to be seen. And so the action we took this week that you talked about was to reduce the spend on the plant while we wait and see.
Why is that? Just a conservative move in case regulatory bodies come down on the other side of building new plants?
Well, it's more the details of it and even just how long the regulatory review will take, because our plant was at a particularly vulnerable spot deep into the design process. So what we did is we're continuing with the license work at the NRC and with the loan guarantee work with the DOE, but we were doing detailed design work, and you don't want to waste money on that if the NRC comes back and says, you have to do 6 things differently as a result of lessons learned from Japan. So we're just holding off until we know what other requirements there might be.
So you still expect to go forward and finish the plant and put it in to action. You just want to make sure that you follow the right guidelines after they're sort of maybe changed around a bit.
Well, I don't want to sound too optimistic, because there's no doubt that our project at this point has a fair number of hurdles at this point. But we do want to get the NRC license and we want to get the DOE loan guarantee, because without those 2 things, the plant is completely dead on arrival. But the commercial arrangements around the plant, selling the power, and of course, as I'm sure you know, Tokyo Electric was going to be a significant investor in the plant. And while we haven't spoken to them about that yet,
they're kind of busy.
They're very busy, and that would be an astonishingly insensitive thing to do. We have to recognize the fact that we may have to have a different ownership group to go forward with the project.
You're smack in the middle of this, though, and we've been talking to a lot of folks since the disaster in Japan and trying to kind of gauge what is the future of nuclear energy. A lot of folks have come on, to our surprise, saying we're going to have to go for nuclear because we don't have a choice. I mean, what do you see? I mean, you're smack in the middle of it. You're, I'm sure, monitoring also the winds out of Washington to get an indication of their change. What do you think?
Well, the issue we have is the classic issue between public policymakers and business people, in the sense that, as you mentioned, we're involved in all types of power generation. Right. Solar has a bright future, but solar and wind are no substitute for baseload nuclear power. And nuclear is the cheapest form of zero-carbon power generation that we have.
Wait. You got to stop me, because we've been all talking about this in the newsroom. This is from a nonpartisan think tank, the Keystone Center, and they said projected operating costs for new nuclear power plants were 30 cents per kilowatt hour of power for the first 13 years until construction costs are paid, followed by 18 cents over the remaining lifetime of the plant. That compares to less than 10 cents per kilowatt hour for coal, natural gas, and even wind, hydro, geothermal, and landfill gas generators. So help me out here. They're saying the cost equation doesn't really make sense for nuclear, not to mention all the potential in terms of liabilities and the mistakes and the accidents that can happen.
Well, that quote is just wrong, because right now, if you look at the costs of various forms of generation, by far the cheapest cost of power in this country right now is natural gas. And if anything, in fact, has inhibited the nuclear renaissance, it's not actually the events in Japan. It's the fact that natural gas has gone from $15 per million BTU to $4 per million BTU since we've been developing the project. But that's the cheapest, and that's about 4 cents per kilowatt hour. Nuclear power is roughly 8 cents per kilowatt hour, new nuclear power. Wind and solar is at least 11, 12, 13 cents per kilowatt hour.
But still less than nuclear.
No.
You're based on this research.
No, natural gas is lower.
Okay, but
wind and solar.
What about all the other ones? I mean, I guess we keep debating, why aren't we putting more efforts in energy? I mean, you're involved in several forms.
Yes.
Why aren't we pushing more efforts into solar, into hydro, and so on and so forth?
Well, there's tremendous effort going into solar and wind, but they're such a small fraction of the overall total, and they're an intermittent load. See, one of the things is, the American people aren't going to put up with brownouts and blackouts, and you need baseload generation to keep the system reliable. And nuclear is the only zero-carbon form of baseload generation that we have.
You know, when Carol and I are looking at nuclear, a lot of times people write to us or people talk to us about the funding. Right. You don't see a lot of private businesses funding nuclear plants themselves. It's always the government that has to get in and fund these things. And I often ask myself, when the government has to fund something, if it really makes sense.
Well, the government is deeply involved in nuclear power anyway, as you can tell from the regulatory perspective. I mean, nuclear power involves unique issues, and so it's very much a public-private partnership.
But if you had to fund a plant yourself or your company, would you do it? I mean, does it make sense as far as the economics are concerned?
Well, we have made a substantial equity investment on behalf of our shareholders, $350 million in cash so far over the last 5 years, and just the length of time it takes to build a nuclear project. I think there's a real question of, is the free market willing to do something that takes 5 years to develop and 5 years to construct? But when we started the project, and again, and electricity prices based off natural gas prices, the nuclear plants looked like they were going to be exceptionally profitable. So if there's, I mean, we work off the profit motive like the rest of the free market. So it did make sense. But it's definitely a partnership, and other countries involve the government more in the financing of nuclear plants because they're huge projects, $10 billion projects.
David, if government wasn't so involved, I mean, I understand they have to be from a regulatory standpoint, but I mean, if they weren't so financially involved or taxpayers weren't all essentially, would you do it?
Well, you could not do it because the amount of financing that you need for a $10+ billion nuclear project is really beyond the scope of most of the power. Remember, power companies in the United States are small compared to power companies in Europe and Asia because of our federalist system, and so you really needed that financing. In fact, if the government had not been offering up loan guarantees, we would never have started the process back in 2006.
Is it even an insurable risk? I mean, can you find an insurance company that covers the possibility of poisoning Tokyo?
Well, the nuclear industry actually co-insures itself under an act called the Johnson Act, and actually that's been a great benefit because the industry takes care to, the industry self-polices itself because everyone is insuring everyone else. And so one of the reasons that the U.S. Nuclear industry has such a great safety record is because everyone's responsible for everyone else's performance.
We could talk about this forever.
We could. There's a million other things at NRG, and we love talking about natural gas, and a lot of people write into us about it.
I know. Can I switch gears?
Are you going to go to the electric cars?
I am.
Yes.
Because we want to talk about what you guys are doing. Because, you know, this is another thing that kind of drives us a little crazy when we talk about electrical cars, but the infrastructure isn't there, but you guys are working on the infrastructure.
Well, that's right. We're trying to turn range anxiety into range confidence with a subscription model where in Houston, which is our home city, that for a certain amount per month, people will get a charger in their garage, which is the home service station of the future, will get access to these convenience chargers that will be located around the greater Houston area, and all the electricity for their car that they could want.
These are the EVgo spots?
I'm sorry?
Are they called EVgo spots, where you go and tank up with electricity?
I think we're calling them freedom chargers.
Freedom chargers. That's American. I'm glad you're doing that in Houston.
That's right, red, white, and blue. But the initiative is called EVgo. That's our company that's doing that. And electric vehicles and nuclear power actually are very important to each other. But maybe, I don't know if you have time to go through that.
We'll save that for another show.
But thank you.
We would like to talk more about it. Come back.
Anytime.
That would be great. David Crane, he's the CEO of NRG Energy. David, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
You bet.